7 false facts from American history. 1. Betsy Ross didn't make the Stars and Stripes. Betsy Ross is a well-known character in American history because she is believed to be the first person to sew the American flag. Betsy's grandson, William Canby, brought up the story of Betsy as the creator of the American flag, but some argue that he did it to get pride and glory to the family. In fact, Betsy was a creative designer. However, it was not Betsy who designed the Stars and Stripes. It is hard to pinpoint one person as the creator of the American flag. Many were involved. Betsy is one of them. According to many historians, the original designer of Stars and Stripes was Francis Hopkinson. 2. The Civil War didn't end at Appomattox. The American Civil War, which began in 1861, was fueled by complex political, social, and economic factors. According to broad literature, the war ended when General Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox. However, this is necessarily correct. Although this incident is considered the final episode of the American Civil War, nearly a half-dozen battles happened afterward. Lee's surrender at Appomattox was a pivotal moment in the end of the war. Still, several subsequent surrenders took place that ultimately terminated the Civil War. In 1865, the Confederate States were defeated, and the Union was restored, finally putting a stop to the war. 3. The Confederate flag wasn't the Confederate flag. A flag with a red background and a blue saltire adorned with white stars is considered the Confederate flag of America. But this is just a common misconception which remains even in the present day. In reality, this flag was never actually the official symbol of the Confederacy. It was only a battle flag used by the Army of Northern Virginia, led by General Robert E. Lee. If so, how did this get interpreted as the Confederate flag? Well, the Confederate flag changed 3 times during the American Civil War, but none of the changes resulted in it becoming the one that is most commonly associated with it now: red background and a blue saltire, thus incorporated as a part of it. 4. The Liberty Bell didn't crack on July 4, 1776. The Liberty Bell, formerly known as State House Bell, is an iconic symbol of American independence, and there are several misconceptions linked with this monument. Narratives on the Liberty Bell tells that patriots rung it on July 4, 1776, causing it to crack, but this is not completely true. The bell itself was gigantic and had been racking for decades, starting in 1752. The precise timing and cause of the large crack are not definitively known. But even in the 1750s, it required constant repairs, making it hard to believe that it was rung in 1776. However, some data reveals that the bell was rung on George Washington's birthday in 1846, worsening the crack. 5. Washington, D.C. wasn't always America's capital. We all know that Washington, D.C. is the capital of America. But was it always America's capital? The answer would be no. Washington, D.C. is a city boasting legacy and esteem. But not even some Americans are aware that the first capital of the nation was Philadelphia. During the Revolutionary War, the capital moved around frequently. However, the Declaration of Independence was signed in Philadelphia, and the city was acknowledged as the capital of the sovereign state. After discussions and negotiations, Washington, D.C. officially became the capital of the United States on June 11, 1800. 6. The American mainland wasn't spared in World War II. During the Second World War, America attempted to be isolated from the fighting, even though the majority of fights took place in Europe, Africa, and the Pacific. America was not entirely spared from the conflict. Alaska and Hawaii were particularly a part of the battle, most notably Pearl Harbor. But none of these territories were part of the mainland by that time. Does that imply the American mainland was fully spared? Not really. In February 1942, Japanese submarines attacked Southern California and fired on the Elwood oil field near Santa Barbara. Furthermore, they also had fights in Oregon. The attacks that took place on the mainland were not as catastrophic as the ones in Pearl Harbor or other continents. However, it still provided ground for battles. 7. Japanese Americans weren't the only ones sent to internment camps. In 1941, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, triggering the Americans to be part of the Second World War. Following the disastrous bombings, President Franklin Roosevelt made a rigid decision to imprison roughly 110,000 Japanese Americans in internment camps. Although there is little information, it wasn't only the Japanese Americans who were sent to internment camps. Large numbers of German Americans, Latin Americans, Japanese Peruvians were also victims of these camps. The victims had a harsh time in these camps, where their civil rights were violated. The misery came to an end in 1988, after President Reagan signed the Civil Liberties Act. What was the most shocking false fact?